All right. So thank you for having me here tonight. I was invited to come to a group called Drinking Liberally, and I assumed that that meant I would get to drink a lot, but I don't think that's going to happen quite yet. Maybe later on. I was told I should talk about how you would talk about this issue, the amendment, around the Thanksgiving table with your Uncle Ralph or your Aunt Sue or whoever it happens to be, who's not otherwise persuaded that he or she should vote against the amendment that's on the ballot next fall. And it occurred to me that that might depend in part on what else you know about Uncle Ralph or Aunt Sue. So if Uncle Ralph is there with his partner Peter, you might not have to do much to convince them to vote against the amendment, but you need to make sure that they get out to vote, and that before they get out to vote, they go to the website for Minnesotans United, mnunited.org, and volunteer their time over the next year and give generously from their treasuries, because we are going to need lots of volunteer time, and unfortunately we're going to need lots of money to defeat this amendment next November. I do think we'll defeat it, but it's not inevitable, and it is going to take a lot of work. So one thing we know about the people who will need to be persuaded on the question of this amendment is that people who are highly likely to vote but also oppose same-sex marriage and are likely to support these amendments tend to be weekly or more often churchgoers. And if you compare the numbers of churchgoers in Minnesota with the numbers of weekly churchgoers in some of the other states where we've had these ballot votes, the comparison would not make one very optimistic. In California, for example, about 32% of the population consists of weekly or more frequent churchgoers. California passed Proposition 8. In Maine, about 31% of the population goes to church weekly or more often. And Maine passed an amendment, Proposition 2, I think it was called, 3 years ago now. Does anyone know what the percentage of weekly churchgoers is in Minnesota? Weekly or more often. It's not 50, it's 44%. So that compares. Right. So that compares to 32% in California and 31% in Maine. So that's a potential problem going into this election. It actually doesn't matter terribly much which religion that person comes from. If they are that devoted religiously, it turns out they don't tend to support same-sex marriage, and they do support these amendments. So those are people that we have to be able to talk to. Let me suggest more broadly that the people who need persuasion on this issue are not liberal Democrats. The issue of same-sex marriage on the political left in this country is over. I mean, it may have been an issue 20 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but it is largely over. There are differences of opinion. There are still some differences of opinion on whether there should be civil unions or marriage, but even that is largely an argument of the past. And so the interesting discussion in the country on this issue is occurring among moderates, political moderates, libertarians, and conservatives. There is a discussion occurring among those groups, and those are the people that those of us who oppose this amendment need to reach. So before we figure out how we need to reach them, we have to be clear about what this amendment is and what it is not. The amendment limits marriage to the union of one man and one woman. If the amendment passes, That's already the case in Minnesota. If the amendment passes, that becomes constitutionalized, meaning that neither courts in the future at the state level nor the legislature can change it. We would have to change the definition through another state constitutional amendment, which is a big barrier, could set back the cause of same-sex marriage in Minnesota by many years. So that's a consideration. The other thing is that the defeat of this amendment in Minnesota does not mean that same-sex marriage becomes the law. We don't have one single same-sex marriage in Minnesota, validly performed in Minnesota, the day after this amendment is defeated, next November 7th. Not one. We still have the burden, the hurdle, of trying to get same-sex marriage embraced by the state legislature. That obstacle will remain. So anyone who, it's not necessary actually to be in favor of same-sex marriage to vote against this amendment, because the defeat of the amendment doesn't create any same-sex marriages. But for a lot of voters, when they when they walk into the ballot box or the polling place next November, they may not have thought terribly much about this, but what they will see on the ballot is this language that tells them that marriage is limited to the union of one man and one woman. And my guess is that a lot of voters will respond, read that language, and respond by saying, of course it is. I'm not voting for anything discriminatory. I'm not voting to deny anyone any rights that they have. I'm only voting to reinforce what we already know, and what has been the case my entire life. So there's nothing very significant about it, just a restatement of the status quo for a lot of people who will walk into this voting booth. But it does have significance. So how do you talk to Uncle Ralph or Aunt Sue at the Thanksgiving table or over the next year? Here are some things I would not say. Here's what I would not say to those people at the Thanksgiving table. I would not say to Uncle Ralph, I would not start the conversation by saying, Uncle Ralph, you are a bigot. Now let's talk about how bigoted you are and how we can change your bigotry. There are two reasons that I would not do this. First of all, it is not a great conversation starter. It is not an effective way to persuade someone to come over to your side. That's reason number one. Reason number two is that it is actually not true for a lot of people. There are bigots who oppose same-sex marriage, and there are bigots who will vote for the amendment next November. But not everybody who does so has this unreasoned, deep, visceral antipathy for gay people. In fact, a lot of people who will vote for this amendment language do think and will say to themselves and to others, I don't hate gay people. I don't fear gay people. I don't have an irrational prejudice against them. Maybe I support anti-discrimination laws. I think they should be entitled to find jobs without being discriminated against, should not be discriminated against in public accommodations and so forth. But I do think marriage is a special thing, and it has always been understood this way, and I'm concerned about the unintended consequences. We should be very cautious and prudent about any kind of change. That's all. That's all. I'm not a bigot. I'm not opposed to gay people. So I wouldn't start the conversation with that. Here's another thing that I would not do. And this is based on what we know so far about the results in the 30 states where we have lost on all of these ballot fights. Despite what many people think, we should not tell Uncle Ralph that this is a civil rights issue. And the reason we should not tell Uncle Ralph this is a civil rights issue is a couple of reasons. First of all, we know it doesn't persuade people. They don't believe it. Second, it is a way of implying to Uncle Ralph that he is a bigot. He is like those people who used to oppose civil rights and stood in the doorhouse at the state university and refused to allow people to enter based on their race. And so it's another way of turning people off in a conversation. And furthermore, very few people think, despite what we might believe based on constitutional law, very few people think that others have rights to do bad things or harmful things. So before they are persuaded that same-sex marriage is a right, they have to be persuaded that it is right. That is, that it is on balance a good thing, or it's not a bad thing. So that's a distinction that's important, and I think we should keep in mind. So those are a couple of things you do not tell your family member. What do you tell your family member? We don't have a complete answer to that yet, obviously. We haven't succeeded in one of these fights yet, but here are a couple of possibilities. You could ask your relative, why, if your relative is married, why did you get married? When you ask people, why did you get married? Not what is marriage or what is the institution of marriage. We should stop using that phrase. It's too abstract. We should ask them, why did you get married? If you ask people that question, you know what they say? They say, I got married because I fell in love. They say, I got married because I wanted to have a family and raise children. They say, I got married because this is part of my religious tradition, my religious faith. All of those reasons. When you go to them, then the next question would be, why do you think gay people want to get married? Why do you think gay people want to get married? The answers tend to be, if you look at some of what we've been looking at, the answers tend to be two things. One is, I don't know why gay people want to get married. I just don't know. Or, second, they say, gay people want to get married for the rights. As if marriage for gay people, unlike for heterosexual couples, is like the unfinished, it's this bundle of goodies you get legally, and it's the unfinished business of the New Deal or the Great Society. It's this something the government gives you as a benefit and not something personal. It's just a legalism. And if they think it's just about the rights, or they don't know why gay people want to get married, then they say things like, well, you can get the rights, we'll call it civil unions or whatever, but you don't need marriage for that. So part of the conversation, I think, with Uncle Ralph or Aunt Sue is to say, you know, gay people actually do get married for the same reasons that you wanted to get married. They fall in love, they don't want to be lonely, many do so because their religious faith supports marriage. They have kids in the home and they want to be able to raise those kids and protect them legally. They want the social support and so on. They're the same kinds of reasons that anybody else gets married. After you get them to understand that point, then I think you can introduce the question, what effect will same-sex marriages have on you personally? Uncle Ralph, what do you think it will mean that Adam and Steve down the block can get married? Will this affect you in some way? Now, what you hear sometime from opponents of same-sex marriage, and you'll hear it from supporters of this amendment, you'll hear language like we have to defend or protect the institution of marriage. This is another really insidious use of this phrase, institution of marriage. I would ask them at that point, will your marriage be affected? I've never heard an opponent of same-sex marriage say, my marriage will be affected. My wife will divorce me if gay couples get to marry. My children will run out of the home. They'll embrace free love and communism if same-sex couples can get married. No one ever says anything like that. And I'll tell you why we know Uncle Ralph will say my marriage is not going to be affected. It's because his wife will be sitting next to him, and if he says that we'll be less devoted to each other, he's going to be in trouble at that point. The other thing we know is that we have a data point about this, actually a quite compelling one that is underused, I think, in this debate, and that is After the election in the fall of 2010, when Iowans voted to reject the 3 judges that had supported same-sex marriage on the state Supreme Court, they were asked as they left the poll in exit polls, regardless of how you feel about the issue of same-sex marriage, has the existence of same-sex marriage affected you personally? And the response, to my shock actually, and to the shock of a lot of people, was that 92% of Iowans said it has had no effect on me personally. 92%. I honestly cannot think of another polling question that Americans have been asked on which 92% of them agreed. I can't. Not evolution. I mean, there's really nothing that you could get them. But they agree on that. I think this is a kind of common sense answer to this question. Now, they'll disagree about whether we should have same-sex marriage, but they agree it doesn't affect them. Well, if it doesn't affect their marriage, and if they don't know anybody whose marriage will be affected, then what does it mean to say we're defending the institution of marriages, but we're not defending any actual marriages? This is an empty concept at that point, and that might be one way to talk about it. I might, with them, try out this idea in connection with why do same-sex couples want to get married. I might assert to them, everybody needs a family. Everybody needs a family. For you, as a heterosexual person, that means marrying a person of the opposite sex and having children and raising them in that home. For a gay person, that means finding someone of the same sex and committing to that person, raising your children together. I mean, whether you're gay or straight, and at the end of the day, we are all looking for that one other special person in life with whom we can suffer and die. I mean, that is, I mean, there, you know, that, I mean, you, in a way that's humorous, but in a way that's sort of deeply true. People want someone there to be with them when they need, and they want to be there for the person that they love, and marriage helps to do that. And it doesn't matter whether you're a straight person or a gay person. All right, so let's suppose that you think that you're never going to reach Uncle Ralph or Aunt Sue with any of these arguments. Let's suppose that they are never going to consider the prospect of same-sex marriage. The other argument I think you can make is that the one I suggested at the beginning, which is that actually same-sex marriage is not on the ballot in November of 2012. The same-sex marriages won't be allowed as a result of defeating the amendment. What's on the ballot is the question of whether we are going to write into our Constitution, in a constitutional cement, this definition or understanding, and then not permit future legislatures to act on knowledge as we gain knowledge over time, experience with the recognition of same-sex marriages in other states and in other countries. And we have a lot of this evidence. It's not as if we're not just arguing about abstract propositions and hypotheticals now. We have actual experience with same-sex marriages. There are more than 50,000 same-sex marriages in the United States today. More than 50,000. So if these couples are going to be some kind of threat to marriage, then we would have seen some manifestation of this, and we haven't seen that yet. Especially for libertarians and Republicans, and all of us have libertarians and Republicans in our families, and we should be able to talk to them. Especially with these people, you might ask them, why are you a libertarian or Republican? It might be that they respond, well, it's because I believe in individual freedom and I believe in limited government. To which you then say, how does this amendment advance individual freedom and limited government? It doesn't do that at all. It is not part of those ideas. So those are some suggestions I would have. I'm not saying that Uncle Ralph will be persuaded at the end of the day. I'm not sure that I'm pretty sure actually one conversation can't persuade someone, won't persuade someone. But it might start that person thinking. And we're going to need a lot. It might start other conversations, and we need that to happen a lot over the next year, because the people we need to reach are actually not in this room. They're outside this room. Those are the people that we have to be able to talk to, and I think we can do that.